From real estate to real life and everything in between. The Brad Weisman Show. And now, your host, Brad Weisman.
All right. We are back. We are back in the studio, and we have a really, really cool guest coming up very soon, actually. This guy's name is Howard Lim. He is a business and brand architect. He has a company called How Creative, and I was really intrigued by how far and how deep he takes the research of a brand and talks about what branding means. And when we talk about Coca-Cola, we talk about McDonald's and all these different things. We have to think about that on a much smaller level too, in just our own businesses, our own entrepreneurial things that we're doing today. It's not just McDonald's and Coke that need to think about it; it's everybody. So I'm going to bring Howard on here. Howard, are you there?
I'm here.
Awesome, man. Thanks for joining the show today. I really appreciate it. Yeah, this is just, it really blew my mind when I started reading more about what you do. And business and brand architect, this is really something big. I mean, you just told me before we went live how you're studying. Tell them a little bit about how you're studying brands and the consumer and what that means and how you do that. Just tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so branding, there's lots of parts to it, but overall, there's three big arching parts to branding. And there's actually three different types of specialists. I just happen to master all three. The first is a strategist, a brand strategist. And a brand strategist is looking at, you could say, building the blueprint for a brand to exist.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so it's like, who's our target market? What's our brand promise? What's our brand story? What's unique about this product, surface, or information? And then there's the brand identity, okay, which is now building that identity to reflect that position from the strategist. Okay. So mean that brand identity, that includes it's called touch points. I call them where they have to be aspiration engagement points. It's every opportunity to basically broadcast your brand to your actual target market or consumer. That could be the billboard, the website, the name of the company, the tagline, what people call the logo, the radio spots, the list goes on. Those are all part of the identity. And the third component and the third part about branding, as far as a specialist, is a brand manager. Let's say now that you have that first store in place, and let's say you want to bring 100 stores throughout the US, the manager job is to make sure that he managed or she managed the brand so for consistency on actually how it's being seen and heard by the consumer or by a buyer or both.
Yeah. So who do you, I mean, I don't know if you would say names or not, but who do you think's the best at branding? Like, give me, like, not. I'm saying companies. Like,
Right.
give me an example of a company that's like, wow, they do a great job branding.
I think one of the best, honestly, was Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs, really?
Absolutely, because he was clear. There's a couple key ingredients to building a really strong global leading brand, and that is to be very clear of your philosophy. And he was very clear from the very beginning of his philosophy that you could feel through all his products, all his different software, and actually when it comes to even the Apple Store as a service. So he's very clear of his philosophy, and that's what gave rise to the shape. For example, part of his philosophy is he studied design and art and typography and calligraphy. The point being is that he understood the Japanese as far as the way the Japanese architecture is, where it's very clean and simple, and therefore it's timeless. Hence the shape for the iPhone when it came out, it did not look like any other phone that was out in the marketplace, where everything, was ornate and had a certain look and feel to it. He kept it to the basic shape, which is a rectangle shape. You can't get any simpler than this.
Yeah.
So he believed
pretty simple.
it's pretty simple.
Yeah, pretty simple.
And you look at all his products, they're very simple, very clean, and very user-friendly. So part of it is basically the form follows function, but also user-friendly. That was part of his philosophy.
Amazing. Yeah, and that makes sense. And you know what's interesting too, you talk about with brands, it's, I think most people, when we talk about brand, we think logo. And It's not just the logo, it's everything around it. It's the colors. It's making sure, you said in the one video I saw that Coca-Cola owns the color red that they use, or they have that patented or whatever, trademarked. Because they're so that if you're going to do something with Coca-Cola, it's got to be that Pantone colored or whatever they came up with.
You're exactly right. So a lot of people think, and that was the old school way of thinking, by the way, of branding. They just think branding was a logo.
Yeah.
The logo is about 5% to branding. Now, here's the valuable behind a logo. If it's done right, I call it a brand mark.
Yeah.
Is that if the brand mark is done right and the name is done right, that becomes the biggest asset, tangible asset a
Mm.
company can own. So let's just say, let's just say that you owned Nike and go, hey, Howard, I'll sell you Nike. I'll give you all the distribution. I'll give you all the clothing, all the manufacturing. I'm not going to give you the name of the swoosh.
Yeah. Right. Right.
A company just lost all its equity and became very generic. So what happens is that the brand name and the brand mark, it starts to create a association of feelings.
Mm.
So when say someone buys Nike and they love the performance of it, they love the quality of it, when they see that Nike swoosh or they hear Nike, automatically it's a trigger of thoughts what they stand for, which is quality and
Mhm.
innovation, and that starts to build trust faster. So the logo again is like 5% of it, but the point being is that it becomes, you could say, the anchoring
Yeah.
to the brand identity.
Wow, that's incredible. And it is, and it's true, because as soon as you see, like you said, you see Nike, if you see Tommy Hilfiger, if you see, any of the brands, the big brands that are out there, people right away they go, "Oh, I trust this brand. I'm going to buy this." It comes down to trust and integrity of the brand, and it's not just the logo. Yes, the logo draws you in, but then that logo stands for something.
Exactly.
It means something, just like, the American flag, it stands for something. I think
Exactly.
that's the most recognizable logo we have, I think, in the United States. But let's go into, so you've been doing this for 35 years, and you work for some pretty big brands. You worked with Apple, Disney, HBO. Where did you get your start in this? Did you come out doing branding right away, or brand architectural stuff? Like, how did you get your start?
So branding didn't even exist as a coined phrase back when I started. This has actually been now 37 years when I started my company. It started off with breaking the code, you could say, of getting stuff out of the Macintosh computer other than just 8.5 by 11 dot matrix headline, black and
Mhm.
white, right? Because color
Right.
printers didn't even exist back then.
Right.
I created a team where we actually were able to produce film from the computer, Macintosh computer, then to burn plates to go on a press to create posters, brochures.
Wow.
And then I started doing animations, stringing programs together that were, you see that on ABC. I was hired by ABC to do more creative work than their online machines that were costing like $250 an hour to rent. Back then, 37 years ago, I think it was like 20 bucks an hour for hire.
Yeah, right.
So I was doing more creative work in a shorter period of time, and that changed what's called now as a category motion graphics. I was part of that. I wasn't say I did that and I was the only
Right.
one. There was a few of us that were doing that. So that's where it started. But who understood what I was doing? Because I showed what I was doing to traditional design houses, and they couldn't get it because everything back then was all hand done. You sent out your typography to a type house, you get your film done for another company. I said, no, we could do this all on a computer. And
Mm.
so the only company that was really getting this were the Fortune 500 companies, because they always were looking for innovative edge. And so we came up with better producing quality ideas than traditional methods and doing it faster than traditional methods. So I was actually helping build brands using digital media, helping lead that way without even knowing I was doing branding. I used to call it image marketing
It's funny.
until about, what was it, 25 years ago. A woman said, Howard, you're doing branding. This isn't graphic design, because that's where I started. It's not advertising, which is where I started. This is beyond that. This is about storytelling. This is about creating strong concepts like advertising, but the aesthetics like designs, really a combination of both.
Yeah. Wow. It is interesting how it's evolved,
Yeah.
and even now, like when you say brand architect, that's a name that I've never heard until I saw it on your information. You wrote a book too called Authentic Brands. And I'm you could tell me a little bit about that. I mean, obviously writing a book is pretty serious. So how did you get into doing that?
So I wrote the book Authentic Branding because at the time there's about, I don't know, maybe 5, 7 books on branding because it was so new. And this is
Right.
back then when there's actually bookstores. So, so I looked through the bookstores and I only found a couple of them, but they're very good books. But what was missing from these books is showing people how to build brands. They talked about branding, but they didn't give you exercise like, you know, why don't you think about this about your brand and ask certain quality questions to get quality answers to start
Mhm.
formulating exactly like your value proposition, your brand promise. Nobody wanted to give away like the secrets behind building world-class brands. So I decided to write this book so I could help out a lot of companies and start to talk about and give exercise how to carve out your brand, how to actually design it, and then how to build it. And that gave rise to authentic branding. Now, why it's called authentic branding? Because during the time I knew like MCI and a lot of these companies were going to collapse because for them it was top heavy about making money. It wasn't about making a difference.
Mm. Yeah, big difference. There's a big difference right there. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I wanted to build brands that were authentic, that were making a difference.
Mm.
Okay.
Interesting. And that lasts then too. I think a brand, that kind of a branding, then it lasts.
Right.
It's not a
Exactly.
quick business. I mean, you like again, like when you look at some of these larger brands that have been doing it for many years, they last because it's not just the brand, it's a whole community around the brand that actually makes sense. Let me talk about also, you had talked about brand icon and brand identity.
Mhm.
And I think I understand the difference by reading up on your information. But can you explain the difference of brand icon between and brand identity?
Sure. So brand icon, there's 5 components that make up a brand icon, which becomes what I said, there's a difference between a logo and a brand mark. So the way I define this, and other people that really are in deep in branding, a few of them will say the same thing, I think. A brand so brand mark is really like, let's say the Nike swoosh.
Yeah.
That's a mark.
Okay.
And there's actually different ways to create marks, like abstract marks, fanciful mark, pictorial marks, but that's the mark. Then you have the brand name, like let's
Hmm.
say Starbucks, okay, that's the
Hmm.
name, or
Okay.
Google. And then you have the tagline, okay, and then you have the color, and then you have the font that you're using. When I put all those components together, I call that the icon because that becomes the imperative cornerstone to a brand identity. So
Mm.
that becomes a cornerstone. Well, now what is a brand identity? It's really all the other components that make up that brand look and feel. That means the website, the brochure, the vehicle wraps, the commercials,
Mm.
everything else has to quote unquote follow a certain system, which is an identity system. Okay, so using the same font, same colors, but that cornerstone again, that nucleus is the icon, and those 5 components I mentioned, I
Yeah.
find are the most valuable assets to a company when it comes to building the equity.
Are your kitchen and bathroom remodels a little overdue? Well, now's your chance to call First Response Contracting. John Sellers will take care of you. 484-256-7136. They do residential and commercial, and they're licensed and insured. Give them a call at 484-256-7136. Yeah, and you don't mess with those things either.
No.
Like, and what about when they want to do a rebrand?
Right.
I
Okay,
mean,
perfect.
yeah, because I've seen on your website, you did some really awesome, what I call rebrand. It might not be what you call it, but I saw like a before and after on your website that I thought it was pretty cool. It went from like sometimes a very complicated logo slash tagline and everything, and then it went to a very clean looking, professional, looking, identity. So, I
Right.
mean, that's something that's tough to do because you got to be careful you don't lose your identity while you're changing your brand, right? Or changing your look.
Exactly. So that steps into my sim system. You're right. So a lot of branding people, what they do is that they'll just go, okay, well, we know that doesn't really reflect the value of the brand, but let's just start creating an identity. But
Mm,
the problem with that is that the identity a lot of times does not reflect the value of the company.
yeah, and I've seen that many times. Seen that many
Right.
times.
Right. So they'll redo the look, but they don't really understand how to position the value of the company so they could actually show up more in the mind and heart of the consumer.
Mm,
Okay, so you're right. A lot of companies, I would say 95% of companies do need a rebrand because they're not reaching the full value and expressing their full value to their target market because their brand on a 10-point scale, their identity could look like a 2 or 3 or maybe look homemade or amateurish.
yeah.
It's not reaching those who are their target market. And so it's not creating an equilibrium either between the value of the inside of the company, what it has to offer as a product and service, and actually how it's being represented through its identity to the consumer or buyer.
Yeah, that's amazing. And a lot of people, I see a lot of people that rebrand and then it doesn't follow the identity of the company, and those two things really have to be together.
Right.
And you know, and recently I was talking to somebody else about this kind of stuff, and they were saying, I know it was a guy who was on a podcast here with me. He said, what he does when he's helping people brand or when he's helping people build their business when they first come to him, he said the logo for him is last
Hmm.
because he said he wants to learn. He likes to go to the sales meetings, go to whatever they can go to, find out what the company feels like, so that when you go to make the logo actually matches the feeling of the company, as opposed to the company having to match the feeling of the logo.
No, he is absolutely correct. And that's why I do the strategy. When I said right now, literally, I'm in
Yeah,
the second half of the third day of a 3-day strategy session. You're
yeah,
exactly right. Is to find out, like the gentleman's absolutely correct, is to find out as much you can about what kind of brand you're creating from the people that actually are going to run the business,
yeah,
and then understand firsthand what their customers feel, and then their employees feel. Basically, all the stakeholders, quite honestly.
yeah,
So yes, you're absolutely right. So it needs to be an expression of what they truly stand for and what
yeah.
truly makes them unique. And then you're right. Then that's when you want to pick up the pencil and start to create. You got to start off with a strategy first before you start building that identity. Otherwise, it's here today, gone tomorrow, whatever you create.
Yeah. No, and I like to hear the backup on that because, like I said, somebody was just in here talking about the branding, and it was interesting. So let's go into this just before we get done here. The
Sure.
brand value as it relates to company equity. You explained this on a podcast, or actually saw you on a live thing. You know, we don't normally think about the brand value as it relates to company equity. That was new for me.
Right.
Can you go into that a little bit? We touched on it a little bit in the beginning, but maybe go into that a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah. And this part of branding, um, 95% gets lost with
Mm.
branders because they don't even understand what brand equity is. But again, that comes from literally representing Fortune 500. What made them a Fortune 500 company?
Yeah, right, right.
Okay, so what's their formula? What are they doing? So brand equity is the assets that are tangible and non-tangible that the company has ownership of. So let's say the Apple phone. Okay,
Mhm.
they have ownership. Even though there's a lot of copycats, they had ownership of the shape. They have the ownership of the name Apple. They have the ownership of what Apple stands for, the user friendly interface, right?
Mhm.
And they also have, from the standpoint of equity, is all the different associations from an emotional standpoint. Like,
Mm.
when people like me, I was one of those people that stood in line for 6 hours getting the first iPhone, right?
Right.
They built a culture because they were so clear of what they stood for. That's all part of the equity that actually moves the needle for what the value of the company's worth, and which is called brand value. What is it worth? What is a company worth on a balance sheet is brand value. What makes that value more is literally what's been associated with that company through equity, tangible and the intangible. So a lot of times, actually, patents and intellectual property, like trademarks, as well.
Yeah. You know what's funny, and you think about that. You stood in line for something that you never even tried.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So obviously it wasn't the product you were buying the brand.
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. I was
For
building.
somebody to stand in 6 hours in
Mm.
line, it's
Right.
the same as going to see a concert.
Right.
You
Right. Right.
know,
Right. Right. Good
you know,
point.
same thing. If I stand in line to go see, Zach Brown or whatever, or Kenny Chesney, I go to see it, stay in line. I'm standing in line because I want that brand up there. That's what I'm going to see is the brand. And so you didn't even hear anything yet. I didn't even hear him sing. He could be terrible, when I get there. He might have a cold. You don't
Right.
know what he's going to be like that day,
Right. Right. Right.
So it's
Right.
just
Right.
that's interesting, but you're going for the brand. You're going there because there's a trust and an integrity of that brand that I'll stand in line for 6 hours because I know what they get to me is going to be great.
Exactly. There's a value that's exchanged and a belief
Yep, and that's
that's
equity right
exchanged.
there.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's inherent. That's amazing. Boy, that's just good stuff. Really good stuff. Hugo, do you have any questions? I see Hugo's taking
I
notes
know.
over here, so I know he's probably got a
I'm
question.
taking notes. I'm taking notes. In the beginning, you mentioned there were 3 components to a brand, and you mentioned that you happen to be a master at the 3 of them. But
Oh,
you mentioned strategist, brand manager. What was the third one?
the implementer, the one that builds the identity.
Ah, I
There you
see. All
go.
righty. Okay.
Ah,
There you
All
go.
right. And
And
I have just one last question. For anybody who's looking out there, watching here and listening to this podcast, who is thinking about just starting a company, what is a quick tip in picking a name for a company?
mm,
well, the name has to come after, like your gentleman that you spoken to about branding. Is you got to start off with a strategy because a name is critical of the positioning, which the positioning has to go through a discovery
mm.
of what's making you unique and what you stand for and how you differentiate from all the others in your space.
Yeah, there's work involved. There's a lot of work involved in that,
Oh,
right? I mean,
you got
that's
a
what you're
lot of
doing
work.
now. You
Right,
said for that other, what you're doing right now is that
right,
discovery, right?
right.
It's
Exactly.
figuring out what makes them tick. It's figuring out who they are. It's all those things because at the end of the day, then that will give you the ideas for what they need to look like in branding.
Exactly. Exactly. And it'll give them the sustainability. It also allow them to grow and scale.
Yeah. So and one more thing here, I saw on your blog, you have a blog, it's on LinkedIn, and it's actually really good. I saw it on there, and you have like, I don't know if it's a blog or whatever, but you write like different things. There was something just recently that was on there, and this was interesting. Was about the female. I'm going to read this. The female
Sure.
consumers are at the forefront of shaping design trends and messaging. Surprisingly, about 80% of today's purchasing decisions are influenced by women in the realm of branding design. Holds immense potential for foregoing emotional connections. So 80% of today's purchasing decisions are influenced by women. That means that influences you on how you're going to tell somebody to brand.
Exactly. So a lot of times, and by the way, doesn't mean that the design has to be always feminine.
Right.
A lot of females want masculine design because
Sure.
they want to have that sense of freedom, but they want to have that sense of stability.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
it's not even, I don't go by so much gender when it builds a brand. It goes more with the energetic vibration of feminine energy and masculine energy. So when it comes to the,
Interesting.
when, yeah, that's a subject in itself. So when it comes to the female shopper, they are 80% are the ones that are doing the quote unquote discovery on their shopping path at the same time the purchaser. And so, yes, a lot of things have to appeal to them, and how you appeal to them is through aesthetics. A lot of
Mm.
products back in the 70s, looked like they were kind of like all manufacturing, kind of like, just something you could buy. Everything started to look the same,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Pretty much a commodity. Let's say a commodity. If you go in a grocery store now and you're buying a drink, look at all the different types of drinks out there and look at all the different packaging that's out there. And it's all about how they're being positioned to radiate and have that person that become a bypasser into a buyer, to stop
Mm.
them in their traps
Yep.
and go, I want to pick this up. This looks
Yep.
really interesting. I want to taste it at least once. So, yes, we right now rely so much on our quote unquote, out of our 5 senses, we use 90% of the time is eyes visual.
Yeah. Absolutely. I do the grocery shopping for us in our house, which is it is funny, but I do it on Sundays. And yeah, my wife is constantly on me because I buy the stuff that just looks fun or looks new or different. So just so you know, I'm probably the easiest person to find to purchase something. You know, I don't even look at it. I just look at that packaging looks nice. This should taste good, and then you
Right.
put it in the basket. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's so funny, but
Exactly.
that's branding. That's what they do. They're sucking me in.
Exactly.
Oh my
Exactly.
goodness.
Now, the thing that makes it authentic, if you purchased it and you had expectations and that experience matched that
Mm.
expectation, then they're doing something that's really brilliant because you'll come back again.
Interesting. So, yeah, because otherwise it was a lie,
Yeah, exactly.
right? Otherwise the
Exactly.
integrity wasn't there. If they're saying that they're the best banana muffin, they better be the best damn banana muffin, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's interesting. Very interesting. Good stuff, man. I'll tell you what, I love this. I could talk about this stuff forever. I love what you're doing. I really, really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us here today. We're going to is there anything else that you want to say before we end the show?
Well, what I'm offering is for those who want a piece of me, is I'm offering how creative forward slash assessment
Ooh.
is that for like a whole hour, I'll work and I work very quickly. I'll look and I call it an assessment. Is I'll go through your identity system, like your website, your logo, the name of the company, your product. If you have packaging, you got billboards, radio spots, whatever it is,
Oh,
I'll go
wow.
through it and I'll critique it and tell you where the gaps are from being from good to great.
So
And
all we do is go to okay, so we're going to go to your website /assessment.
exactly how creative backslash assessment. And if
That's
you and
fantastic.
if you type in on the coupon code, because I sell this for $2,500 for an hour of my time, the whole thing's recorded.
Oh, wow.
If you put in HOW, how, it'll knock it all the way down to $500.
Oh, man. We're gonna have to put that you're writing it down, Hugo, because we're gonna
I
put that
am,
on our
yeah.
social media when the show airs. We're gonna put that on our social media so that everybody has the advantages of that. That's amazing. We really appreciate that.
Sure. I mean, I love the entrepreneur spirit, and we are living in a free enterprise country, which I
Yes, we
absolutely
are.
love. And
Yep.
I'm all about empowering people to become healthier and wealthier.
So are
Why
we,
not?
man. So are we.
Yeah.
We love it. Thanks so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. We'll definitely have to have you back. Good luck with that project you're working on right now, and that'll be it. We'll see you later.
Okay.
Thanks so
Thank you,
much.
sir. Thank you for having me.
Alrighty.
All right, there you have it.
I love
Howard
it.
Lim from How Creative. That was an amazing show. I mean, this guy is branding everybody and doing a great job of it. And if you want to see anything else with him, just go into howcreative.com /assess, I think is what he said. And it's howcreative.com. Yes, go there and you can figure it all out. We'll have it on our social media also. All right, thanks a lot. See you next Thursday, 7 p.m.